Welcome to a special edition of the Tear Sheet Podcast on the ground in Orlando at the FIS Emerald Conference. I'm Zach Miller, Tear Sheet's editor-in-chief. In an evolving banking landscape, where competition and customer expectations are higher than ever, banks must take steps to deliver a seamless digital experience. Shane McWilliams will explain what banks need to do to step up and meet the moment, including 1, elevating their platform serving SMB customers, 2, lean into data sharing capabilities, and 3, build out fraud and security safeguards to combat the bad actors. We'll together explore why now is the time for banks to lean into these areas to position themselves for the future. Shane, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Zach.
I think a great place to jump into is to start with your role. What do you do at FIS? And tell our listeners a little bit about how you do it.
Absolutely. So I lead the retail digital banking businesses for FIS. So all the retail digital banking businesses under one roof for all of our different customer sizes. We approach, everything through a lens of our customer, So obviously I'm running a pretty large business and a set of businesses here at FIS. We talk a lot about products, we talk a lot about technology, but I spend the vast majority of my time thinking about our banks and their end customers, right? And my orientation on a day-to-day is about them and about their customers. And if we focus on that, then everything else that we need to think about also just kind of works itself out. So,
well, welcome to the podcast. And I think you beat me to the punch. I think that's a great framework to step into the beginning of our conversations. What do you see as the biggest pressures facing banks today when it comes to digital experience and meeting customer expectations?
Great. I would say that there's 3 that I can think of right off the top of my head. I think first is small and medium businesses, right? The prevalence and the growth in small and medium businesses recently is extreme, right? But along with that, I think those small and medium businesses are increasing their level of expectation of kind of what they want from their banks and their technology providers and their fintech providers. So it's not just the growth in the small and medium businesses, but it's their expectations have grown along with the prevalence of those SMBs. I think second would be the frequency with which end customers are actively choosing to share their financial data out online. And I think of all the things that we'll probably talk about today, that's the one where the banks are the farthest behind. I think that most banks don't even realize the prevalence with which their customers are sharing, their personal data. And as you mentioned, like fraud is a critical theme. It's probably always going to be a critical theme, but I would say, anytime there's any level of uncertainty of any type, you start to see it creep up a little bit more, and you see the types of fraud change a little bit as well. And I think that's kind of what we're looking at right now.
I like the way you position that because I think all three areas that we're going to talk about today have totally accelerated over the past few years. I know we've seen that on this podcast. So looking ahead, what do you think will separate the banks that thrive in the next few years versus those that kind of lag?
Yeah, I hate to say the word personalization, right? Because it's been so overused. And I sort of feel like that the word personalization just sort of directly points at like UI, UX, or what set of products are you offering me? I think the banks need to get, and financial providers need to get a lot smarter to show their customer that, well, I think what the customer wants to know is they want to know, show me that you know who I am, right? And sure, some of that's with UI, some of that's with product, right? But I think there's a lot of other ways sort of to approach that.
My other apps know me when I come back, right?
Yeah.
I expect my bank to know me too.
Exactly. And I think there are a lot of, opportunities, I think, through data, leveraging data, and I think we're really sort of stepping into that next generation of sort of digital banking with the banks that can start to take advantage of that data and really target their customers a little bit more in a way that like tells them that I know exactly who you are and I'm here to provide sort of what you need. And I think that's a really big part of what we're going to talk about here today, especially when it comes to some of those subgroups and that small and medium businesses. I think is a really, really important group to target.
Do you see the changes in personalization impacting customization in the sense, well, people have different experiences based on who they are with their banks?
I think it's a little combination of both in the sense where I think with small and medium businesses, that's an interesting one where it's a very gray topic. Like if you ask anybody, hey, what do you need to have to be able to support a small, medium business? You could throw 100 darts and you would never hit the target for each one of them, because there's a lot of it's a lot of gray area in that space. So, I think a big part of that, right, is to really try to understand what it is that they're wanting to do, and and tackle that as best you can with a set of products and services. But again, I think beyond the customization, right, I think if you can use data to know your customer better, and then basically provide them timely offers or a timely help, I think that's really a way where it goes beyond sort of tech customization, right? That can, again, tell that customer, hey, I know who you are. I know what you need right now, right? And maybe give us a call.
I had somebody on the podcast recently talk about they themselves had just moved, and they had taken out a mortgage from their bank, but the bank didn't actually engage with them in any other way, knowing that they were moving, which is a huge life experience, and they kind of wanted that from their bank, right? Is that an example of something that maybe down the line we could get to?
Yeah, that's a great example. I think we've got some stuff that we've been working on here at FIS lately. We've got a really good partnership with a company called NG Data. They've got a really sort of best in market engine for targeting those customers, right? And so what it does is it allows the banks to take advantage of the data about the customer, and then basically, to your point, like step up to their customer in a very specific time. I think it's going to beyond just, hey, I need a mortgage. Hey, I'm buying a car. I think it's going to get way more sophisticated very quickly, right? I think when you talk about businesses and small businesses, I think it's the ability to see cash flow data, right? It's the ability to have, data flowing out to your accounting system, but having all that hooked into your banking environment is what allows that to happen, right? And I think that's one of the biggest things that you're going to see over the next couple of years is the consolidation of both those services and that data flow, using sort of the bank technology as a central sort of nexus point for that. That is what allows them to then do that type of target. I think the banks want to do that. I think everybody wants to do that for their customers, whether it's for revenue reasons or because they just want to be helpful, or both, right? But if you don't have that data because everything's distributed, how would you even approach that? So I think there's going to be a big shift over the next couple years.
I appreciate that. And in a way, it kind of changes the role of the bank. I want to double click on something you said before, Shane. You said that banks weren't even necessarily cognizant of how their customers are sharing data online. And so we know that data sharing can unlock new horizons for banks, but it also raises risks around privacy and regulation. How do you think banks can lean into data sharing capabilities while also maintaining the trust and compliance that they need to?
Yeah, I mean, this is obviously a very difficult topic to challenge.
Yeah, in 2 minutes, I want you to tackle.
2 minutes, I get the whole thing nailed. No, I think the number one thing that I would say, and I talk to banks all the time. I've got hundreds of bank customers and worked with thousands of banks in my career. I can tell you for sure that the banks have no idea the prevalence with which their customers are sharing their data, right? And keep in mind,
through credentialing, I guess.
Through credentialing, through aggregation, kind of right, and all of that, and and I think the banks don't even know that it's happening, right? I think they don't know the extent to which it is already happening, and so I think the banks feel like, when I talk to them, they definitely feel like they're behind the curve, right, and not even realizing that it's happening, and then you can start to have the conversation about how we tackle it. So
at this point, it's an educational thing, just telling them how wide the issue is.
I mean, in the last couple of months, every single bank that I've had this conversation with if you ask them to guess what percentage of their users are already doing this, they're not even close.
Wow.
On the percentage of people that are already doing it. And again, I think people are doing these things for convenience, right? Hey, my wealth advisor might not be with my bank, and I want to pull everything together into one place so we get a clear view of my financial profile. So 1,000 reasons as to why you'd want to do this. So I think, to your question about sort of how do we work through this, especially interestingly enough, coming from somebody who, again, is in the fintech space, right? It's that balance between sort of the convenience and then opening things up, too much, right? And so you got to be really, really careful with, you want to be convenient for the end customer, but you don't want to open things up too much. And so I think the biggest thing there is you have to find somebody who, as a partner who really, there's lots of people out there that sort of understand that balance. I think we're really good at it. And I think it's just important to find a good partner and then have that conversation about, what your customers are already doing, sort of, and that balance between sort of convenience and risk. And there's a lot of things that you can do from a technology perspective that will help make that an easier discussion to have.
Including APIs, which is my next question. So can you speak to the role of APIs in enabling smarter, more secure data sharing between banks and third parties?
Absolutely. I think I don't think anybody out there, very few people out there understand that when you're sharing your data with an aggregator, a lot of times, almost every time, that's actually executed via screen scraping, which just sounds on the surface like super duper janky, right?
Yeah.
And screen scraping, again, I mean, it's a little bit of a fraud vector, right? It's an unstable sort of way of sharing this data.
Even if intentions are good, it still
even if the intentions are good, right? It opens things up. Also, it's a one and done type of activity. Like once you open up that pathway, are you going to remember in a year that you went and opened up that pathway to be able to go back and shut that off? Like
very few people go back.
Absolutely not, right?
You're continuously sharing your data for years without even knowing about it as a consumer.
100%. And then people are asking, why is my app loading so slow, right? Or why is the website loading so slow, right? Screen scraping and that type of data, it slows everything down. So there's a whole bunch of like knock-on effects, sort of because of, but again, I mean, the desire for sharing my data through these aggregators is there. And so, again, we got to catch up, right? So APIs are the way, right? For sure, right? Creates a clean data connection, out, which is great. It's not happening via screen scraping, which again, so we're not being janky anymore, right? And the data is flowing out as you would want it to go.
It's tokenized, it's not necessarily stored the data per se.
Exactly. And so what's nice about this is, so we've actually built, we've got a set of integrations that go out to the top 10 data aggregators. So if you're within our ecosystem, we can turn that on for our customers. The nice thing about that is, I feel like it sort of hits that sweet spot, right? It allows the banks to enable their customers to share their financial data in a way that's safe, right? It promotes the convenience of sharing that data, but it does it in a way that is clean. The other thing that's nice about that too is you have one-stop shopping to be able to go back, and if you want to sever those connections, you can do that, right? All from one place. I think that's frankly a responsibility of the technology providers and the banks, is to try to create a place where you can go back and then manage those connections as an end user, right? Because it's really, really difficult to keep up with that stuff. So, I think that's
I know that's been an issue in the news about who's responsible ultimately if there is a data leak or something like that when data gets shared. So I mean, this APIs help to determine, I guess, who owns it and who's responsible for it, as you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, look, in the end, it's the end user's data, right? It's their choice to share that data, and of course, there's disclaimers all over the place. But I do feel like that if we're doing our best job as a technology provider to the financial industry, I think we're going to try to do things in a way where, it's as clean as we possibly can make it. But again, allowing the banks and especially the end users to control that data and to be able to go back and say, hey, you know what? I'm not using that wealth advisor anymore. Let me go ahead and shut off that link to my bank account and X, Y, and Z, right? I think that's really important. So
got it. I want to shift to that third bucket that you talked about in your introduction, which is fraud and cyber. And we know that fraud and cyber are continuously growing, particularly in times of economic uncertainty. Consumer financial anxiety is quite high right now. What are some of the most pressing threats banks face today, and what kind of safeguards should they prioritize?
Yeah.
In a world of endless options. Yeah.
I mean, fraud is a never-ending sort of bucket. Kind of feels like. I actually started my career pretty early on at a startup. I mean, have you heard of LifeLock? Right.
Sure. Yeah.
So I was at a company that was the credit and identity white label provider for that entire industry. So I know a whole lot about this stuff. But yeah, I mean, I think from a fraud perspective, there's always fraud going on. I think people tend to think about large scale, sort of really sophisticated fraud attacks. Always, of course, that's always an issue, always something you have to keep vigilant about. It's always something we're going to be working on. But I think, again, as we enter in any sort of times of uncertainty, right? I'm not an economist, so I'm not saying anything about that per se. Could be great, could be bad, who knows? But if there's any sort of uncertainty, right? You're seeing your 401k flying up and down this week or that week. Individual people start to get nervous, right? And they do things that you wouldn't necessarily, expect them to do. So I can tell you a number of stories of financial institutions or other people, and banks that you wouldn't expect it. It's not, it could be significantly sized banks, but folks know how to find and start taking advantage of that. And it sort of shifts from, hey, it's external sophisticated actors on a large scale, to it turns into being like, it might be your own customers that are sort of doing this out of, like, frankly, a desperate sort of, maybe in some cases, like, sad type of a situation. But people know, they're like, they have a pretty good angle. They know, hey, if the financial institution is not going to pursue a dispute sort of below $60, like, you're gonna see a whole lot of $59 disputes coming in, right? You'll see people that are getting taken advantage of, right, in a difficult time for them, right? Where somebody we had heard about another customer where they had gotten a job offer. It was a remote job offer. They were sent $1,000 to go purchase a laptop, right? Of course, that $1,000 that was sent to them was fraudulent, right? We sent you too much. They send them 500 back. The bank sort of clues into it. Next thing you know, that actual end users, they're net out $500. So there's a whole lot of new things that are sort of starting to show up out there. I think the biggest thing that you can do for some of these things, obviously, is personal education and just doing everything you can to stop the social engineering attacks. Because again, I think the large scale attacks, there's always a risk of them, but I think as an industry, we've gotten pretty decent at fighting against those type of things. But I think it's the individuals that we have to focus on now, the individual people, right?
So I'd like to, as we're getting near the end of our conversation, I'd like to kind of bring everything together. So what kind of benefits can banks expect if they get it right around these three areas that you were talking about: serving SMBs, data sharing, and fraud protection?
Yeah. I think, as we sort of alluded to early on, I think, to me, a lot of this, again, comes down to, it's the relationship that you're building, right, with your customer. And for me and my orientation, again, it's around that long-term. How do we build a long-term relationship together? Whether it's me and our banks here at FIS, right, or if it's those banks and their end customers, that's pretty much all that I think about. And so if you can hit a home run, and have that SMB, out there, have the capability that they need, not have to shift through 55 different apps to do an invoice and to take payment and do these other things, they're gonna be happy, and they're gonna stay with you, right? Same thing with that end customer, right? If you can protect them, right? If you can offer the right set of services. So to me, again, I think that's a lot of what this is about, is just get yourself set up in a way to where, hey, we're offering what we need to these customers. We're really trying to think about them and put ourselves in their position, as opposed to sort of that orientation of, let's offer them a product, let's offer them a loan, right? I mean, that's the sort of the historical way of thinking for many people. And I really feel like if you spend most of your time, orienting around sort of the customer, right, the end customer, then everything else, that the pressure that you're feeling is I promise you, it'll solve itself. Just orient around the customer, build those long-term, really sticky relationships with your end users, and the rest of the stuff will be fine. So,
I have one last question. I think we're going to end on a really important question. So I want you to take a little bit of time to think about this.
All right.
We're on the ground here in Orlando, right? It's FIS Emerald. What is your favorite Disney character and why?
Oh, man. My favorite Disney character. Let's see. I think I got to go.
From any movie, any cartoon, anything.
From any movie, any cartoon. I think I got to go classic,
Go for it.
It's Mickey on the boat, right? All the way back to the 1930s. I think this is great. It's been a really good environment. I think the customers here have been fantastic. I think it's such a great place to do this. And honestly, of all the things that I've seen, that's been the most enjoyable here, of course, along with Disney, right, are just the interactions that I'm seeing people have, the informal conversations in the hallway, chance to meet somebody like you, and I think it's a great thing. I would encourage anybody, if you're in the space, to come to this, next year. You can learn a lot, meet a lot of good people, and we're having a good time. And then we're going to see Pitbull tomorrow night. So,
Shane McWilliams, head of retail banking at FIS. Thanks for joining us on the Tearsheet podcast today. Let's wave. We've got a bunch of people looking at you out there. We can wave to everybody.
Great.
Thank you for joining us on the podcast.
All right. Thank you for having me. All right.
Up high.